Welcome to the Conscious Publicist Podcast, a space where thoughts become ideas to advocate for a more conscious human experience in the media. Our thoughts and ideas inspire action, and the most notable leaders and organizations have transformed thoughts and ideas into global initiatives that have impacted the lives of millions. My name is Ashley Graham, and as a woman-owned business founder and publicist, I guide leaders, visionaries, and creators in discovering their conscious media voice and methodologies that inspire connection, community, and impact through aligned media channels. In this podcast, we'll dive into public relations, thought leadership, business, and entrepreneurship, all through the lens of being a conscious human being. I'll take you behind the scenes into the habits, thoughts, and modalities that have helped leaders shift past paradigms of limiting beliefs, comparison, and self-doubt to show up for themselves to become the subject matter experts they were called to be. Subscribe to the show on Apple or Spotify and join us on this journey of awakening the conscious, enlightened leader within you. What if the thing that broke you open at 9 years old became the very gift you spent the rest of your life giving to the world? My guest today has turned that question into a life's mission and movement. Tiffany Yu is a disability advocate, community architect, and the CEO and founder of Diversability, a fully disabled-run social enterprise redefining what it means to lead with pride. She's also the force behind the awesome Foundation Disability Chapter, which has funneled over $100,000 in microgrants to more than 100 disability projects across 17 countries. As a 3-time TEDx speaker, she has commanded rooms at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Harvard, Stanford, and Singularity. And if that weren't enough, her 2024 book, The Anti-Ableist Manifesto, is out now and it is a must-read. In this conversation, we go deep on what it means to be an accidental entrepreneur, how community can carry you when your own self-belief runs dry, and what happens when you stop performing who you think you should be and start becoming who you actually are. Tiffany also walks us through her 5 pillars of disability advocacy, the gentle nudges from the universe she's learned to trust, and why the greatest gift you can give the world is simply being yourself. This one goes to the messy middle, raw, real, and still forming, and that's exactly where the magic lives. Such a very special guest to introduce you today to the Conscious Publicist Podcast. This guest, I feel it's a very full circle moment. I was introduced to Tiffany Yu a couple of years ago when I went to an event with my late friend CJ. I got to see Tiffany speak, and come to find out a couple of years later, we ended up in the same community together, and she is just the perfect guest to speak on what it means to be a soul-led entrepreneur, founder, now author, but then also just incredible human being. So Tiffany, welcome to the Conscious Publicist Podcast. To get us started with our $1 million question today, what story and message are you looking to tell through your brilliance and your wisdom?
Well, first, thank you for having me. And I think the first thing that came to mind was the message that the greatest gift that you can give the world is by being yourself.
That's very beautiful. Would you say that right there, that message is a perfect example as to how you've been able to lead down a path of becoming a CEO, founder, but then also an author, and amongst many other amazing things that you're doing right now?
I would say yes, and I started out by calling myself an accidental community builder, and then I was an accidental advocate, and I still call myself an accidental CEO. And so everything felt like it was happening accidentally, but accidentally with intention, because by being yourself, these opportunities all came. And even accidentally as an author, like I feel like my journey into writing a book came very serendipitously rather than me trying to go through the whole process, which I'm so grateful for.
Talking to what you were saying about becoming an accidental CEO and founder, can you tell us a little bit from your lens what that means and what that experience was like, especially creating and founding Diversability?
In a lot of ways, I still feel like I have some imposter syndrome about being an entrepreneur because our origin story started when I was in college. And essentially, Diversability first started as Georgetown University's first ever disability student club. And a couple years before that, I had co-founded Georgetown University's first ever Taiwanese American student club. So what I knew how to do is I knew how to start student clubs, which in the broader context, if you grow up with a student club, it then becomes a community, after you graduate. So that was the origin of it. And I actually I kind of left Diversability at Georgetown after I graduated. I moved to New York and was working in finance at the time. And while I was working at these big companies, I had access to their disability communities, or I had the infrastructure in place. I actually co-founded Bloomberg's Disability Employee Resource Group. So I kind of took those, I know how to start a student club, to I now can join what the corporate version of a student club is, which are these employee resource groups or business resource groups, depending on what company you're at. And then I can co-found and start my own disability employee resource groups. And it wasn't until I had then moved to a startup where I didn't have a disability community anymore. And that's when I kind of revisited what I had been working on while I was at university, Diversability, and I started to explore what would Diversability look like outside of a collegiate environment. And interestingly enough, at that point in time, I actually joined the community that you and I are both a part of called Dreamers and Doers. And it was through the encouragement of the members of this women's community that we were in that made it so that it was like, okay, you don't have to start a whole new thing. Why don't you just organize one event? And if people show up, then you know you're onto something. And if not, you still have your startup job. So Diversability then relaunched in 2015. So 2009 was the origins of the Disability Student Club, Diversability at Georgetown. And then 2015 was the relaunching of Diversability as like a meetup group, or let's host one event. And I was still working full-time in a finance/business development type role at a music startup. So at that particular point in time, I moved into Diversability being a side hustle. So I didn't really see myself as an entrepreneur just then. But interestingly enough, we hosted our first event. It was sold out. It was a co-working space in downtown New York. And at the end of the event, a lot of people came to me and they said, oh, this was so great. We haven't really seen community spaces for disabled young professionals. I can't believe this was over 10 years ago. So I was still a young professional then. And we evolved from there into shifting into having an online community in case so people could connect in between our events. And then other people who were joining this online community were exploring starting chapters in their cities and what that might look like. And in 2017, still running Diversability as this side hustle, and we would have interns or people who were working for us who were maybe in high school or college at the time. And in 2016, I left my startup job at a music startup and moved to a real estate startup in San Francisco, was still doing Diversability on the side. And on March 3rd, 2017, I got fired. And that was like the beginning. First of all, I like to share that because I think everyone maybe looks at my LinkedIn highlight reel and thinks that I'm good at everything. But there are going to be some things we're good at and some things we're bad at, right? Just like any other human. And so I think part of this journey of this gift of being yourself is finding those things that you're good at and those things that you're not so good at. And maybe the things you're not so good at, you delegate to someone else or find other ways to to get support. That's why I feel like I'm an accidental entrepreneur, because I never anticipated doing Diversability full time. And I actually told myself as I transitioned onto unemployment benefits after I got fired from that job, I was like, I'll work on Diversability until I find my next thing. And so I was like applying to different jobs, and it was, I don't know if ironic is the right word, but the same month that I got fired, I had gotten invited to speak at the late Colin Powell's nonprofit called America's Promise. And some of the speakers were like former presidents. Common, the rapper, was there. It just felt ironic because it was like, in one part of my life, I feel like I'm like failing or floundering. And in another part of my life, I'm getting to take the main stage and getting to share my story. And the America's Promise Alliance was a nonprofit. Essentially, I think to me, it felt like, how can we let kids be kids? And I felt like that really tied into my work in some ways as well. So I think that was the origin story. I will also share too that I don't think it was until 2020, maybe like 2018 to 2020 timeframe, that we really started to find our stride. And then it wasn't until 2021 that I think we figured out a pathway to some better sustainability. So it did take time too. And it's been interesting. A couple years ago, we celebrated our 15th year since the first version of Diversability at Georgetown. And I was reflecting on those early years of, or even those like early days of just having a really hard time getting people to join a community, join a disability-centered community. To now, I think we're not really doing as much marketing. I feel like we've created a really strong brand for ourselves. But now it's more, how can we think about elevating and cultivating the next generation of disability advocates?
That is such an incredible story. I have been following along with you and your business and your thought leadership for what I believe is a couple of years now. And I've gotten to hear you speak in person and got to know a little bit about your story. But it's like conversations like this is how we're able to see that full lens, that the pieces that I wouldn't have known. I did know that Diversability had started from a college program or community that you had started, but to know that you were brought to this crossroad, if you will, like getting let go from your full-time job and then really sitting with if Diversability was going to be your next path. And it sounded like you were presented with this incredible opportunity to transform it in the way that it needed and was always meant to be. And now here you are 10 years down the road. There's some other things that I had read from your, as I was telling you before we hit record, there was these details in your signature that I was like, oh my goodness. Like, again, it brings this picture really to larger scale, but you had mentioned that there was 100 projects through Diversability. There was 99.5 thousand granted, and then Diversability is in 16 countries. Am I sharing that correctly?
That is actually another initiative.
Gotcha.
So if I can just, maybe I will shed some light on how I view Tiffany, the disability advocate.
Yes,
and I want to say
absolutely.
it's 5 pillars. So the first pillar is what I call like community and social health. And that's where Diversability fits. And we have our community and events, educational content we're sharing across our social platforms. And then we run something called the D30 Disability Impact List, which is really around showcasing disability leadership across the world. Then the second pillar is what I call education. So this is really, how can we bring more non-disabled allies into our work? And this comes through a book that I have written called the Anti-Ableist Manifesto, which is inspired by a social media series I have called the Anti-Ableism series, which the Anti-Ableism series has 350 parts, over 8 million views across Instagram and TikTok. And really the pinnacle of that series and the book and this education pillar is, how can I be a better ally to disabled people? Or I want to show up better for the disability community, but I'm not quite sure where to start. So education is pillar number 2. Pillar number 3 is kind of what you saw in my signature. It's what I like to call economic empowerment. And that to me is an initiative that I started with the late Alice Wong called the Awesome Foundation Disability Chapter, where every single month we will award $1,000 to a disability project around the world. And as we're recording this, we've actually surpassed 100 projects granted and 100,000. And I think we're maybe at 17 countries now. So I need to update my email signature. Most people don't know this, but Diversability at Georgetown started with a $500 grant we received called Reimagine Georgetown. And I think about when I got that $500, now 15 years later, it doesn't seem like that much, but as a 20-something-year-old who was still developing her own voice and her own confidence in her own disability identity, that was a game changer. And it made me realize it didn't matter the monetary amount. It mattered that someone believed in me. And I know you've been following my story for a while, but I even think now, almost 30 years after the car accident where I became disabled, I'm still on that journey of finding my own confidence and my voice in different aspects of my life that I felt were just, quote, not for me because other people told me that, or other people just assumed that I couldn't do it. So that third pillar is economic empowerment. And a couple other initiatives in there, like I'm part of something called Adaptation Ventures, which is a venture capital fund to invest in disability tech and disability innovation, which has been really cool to see a fund like that, disabled-led, wanting to reinvest back into our community at that scale. And then the fourth pillar is what I call civic engagement. This will include different advisory boards that I'm on. Some of them include, I'm on an advisory board for the NIH, which is the National Institutes of Health, and also advisory boards for the FIFA World Cup 2026, which is coming to LA across the West Coast and US and Canada. And then also one of the advisory boards for LA 28, the Olympics and the Paralympics that are coming. And then a fifth pillar that I actually just added recently. I know it's a lot, but to me, when I have that umbrella of disability advocate, it makes sense. And hopefully for your listeners, this will also make sense to them too. But the final pillar I've been calling joy. And I actually think it's what makes my advocacy sustainable. And part of what inspires my joy is reconnecting with 9-year-old Tiffany and the things she would have loved to do. So I think before we started recording, we talked about, I just ran a half marathon, and I have this memory of over 20 years ago, trying to join my high school's track team and not even being able to run a mile. I also paraclimb, which is climbing for people with disabilities. And I have so many memories of being a kid at birthday parties at rock climbing gyms. So part of that joy is rediscovering how amazing bodies are and our younger selves, and not losing that sense of awe and wonder that we had when we were younger.
It's amazing. Like you said, I feel that all of those pillars are in full essence of you, which brings us back to how you responded to the icebreaker question, is just being our full selves. And it sounds like you are your full self in all of these initiatives, and every single part of who Tiffany is, both from the community standpoint through how you show up in your thought leadership, but then also you and your passions and how you continue to challenge yourselves to strive for more. I think it's so beautiful. And that's why I was so excited that you were interested in coming on the podcast, because in the trailer for the podcast, I talk about how the little ideas that come to us, whether that be passion projects or things that we wanted to speak into existence, if nurtured and really given our full passion and our full drive, they can turn into initiatives that impact the lives of millions. And in every initiative that you have going right now, I feel that is what you are doing. And to have you and your voice and your perspective and your lens here, it's such an honor to have you bring your brilliance to the show. So I know that's I'm thanking you a little earlier in the conversation than I typically do. I do a thank you and a moment of gratitude at the end, but I was just so excited to interview you. And I know that this has been a conversation in the making for a little while now. So
for years, dare I say.
Yes. And it's really exciting to also hear, again, the beauty about conversations like this is I did not know that you had joined Dreamers and Doers at the very beginning stages. You know, as somebody who came in years down the road, you think that, oh my goodness, you were this thriving founder who then were introduced to this community and then take it up to the next level.
Yeah.
So it really speaks to, I feel, the magic of what Dreamers and Doers offers as a community. And to hear that was a big catalyst at the beginning stages of your growth, it makes me even more excited to be a part of the community and be in that energy amongst all these incredible people.
Yeah. Can I share something about those early days?
Yes, absolutely.
I was living in New York at the time when I got connected to Geisha, who's the founder of Dreamers and Doers. And I still remember they hosted an event in New York City where I think they had each one of us kind of stand up and introduce ourselves and share an ask or an offer. And I remember that at the time, the group was really flourishing virtually. And I remember standing up and I said, "Hi, I'm Tiffany." And the number of whispers I heard, supportive whispers that were like, "Oh my God, I can't wait to go meet her." It was honestly the first time I felt seen. And I will never forget that feeling. I have shared this with Geisha and the team before, which is why I've been a part of the community for 10 years, is that I would not be here talking to you if I had not had the support of this incredible community of people who had never met me in person, but were rooting for me just because. And I think about that, and maybe that's the other asterisk message, is I think that all of us, and perhaps I can even date it back to receiving that $500 grant too, I just needed someone to believe in me. And I think that after becoming disabled at 9 years old, I felt so isolated, excluded in my experience. I do not know. Maybe I'll have to do some more reflecting on this, but I can't remember anyone that I felt like who believed in me until I became an adult. And that's a lot of years of developmental time to really, again, find your voice and build your confidence. And so I am so grateful that it did come to me later in life. I try to be someone who doesn't live with any regrets, which is maybe why I'm trying to do all the things that maybe 9-year-old Tiffany would have wanted to do, but in a different way. But I do wonder if someone had just asked me how I was in those years immediately following the accident, if I would have a different life path than I do now. But I feel so grateful that I do feel like I'm in alignment, and that I can date back to these key milestone moments in these different communities, or even early on in Diversability's journey. But I don't think people realize, I even think back, even the person, it was like a student selection committee. I don't know if they realize how impactful it was for me to receive that $500 grant. And what was fascinating about that whole thing was I think they had about $10,000 to allocate. And they just decided to make up an extra $500 just to give to me and my project. And I had missed the deadline. There were so many things that made it so that it might not have worked out. But given the way that it did, it was just such a pivotal moment. And again, back in 2015 with connecting with Dreamers and Doers too.
Oh my goodness, there's so many parts there. One, it's like I wish I could go back and just give 9-year-old Tiffany the biggest hug ever that I've ever given. And you said something that was pretty profound, and this actually came to me during my postpartum, that sometimes if we're just asked a question, how are you and how are you really? Somebody really to challenge that repetitive, almost normal automatic response of just saying, "Oh, I'm good," and then moving on. If we had somebody to challenge by asking us, "How are you really?" Like, really tell me how you're doing. I feel having somebody just really be in that depth with you can make the biggest shift in your life. And thinking about that time for you around 9 years old, our biggest belief system is starting to be imprinted around 7 to 8 years old. So with 9 years, that's really not that far from that such pivotal developmental time in our journeys as human beings as we're growing. That it's, yes, if somebody would have just asked you, how are you? What do you need? That could have made the biggest shift in your life. But it sounds like you did get that in a way that was, it just sounds that it was always going to be yours and it was always meant to change your life in that period of time. It's almost like the biggest timeline jump.
I'll put an asterisk, I'll do another yes, and I'll say, I wish a safe person had asked me how I was. Because you want the person who asks you, how are you really, to be able to have the emotional capacity to receive whatever's going to show up. And if you don't feel like you can be held in that moment, that's hard too. And I will say, I got to spend time with a friend that I hadn't seen in 10 years. And he now has a 9-year-old. And I didn't want to bring it up. And I think I only said it in passing. But I can't imagine his son being me and going through what I went through. There's still so much innocence and play. And maybe in some ways, we don't need to sit there for that long. But I've had an opportunity over the past couple of years to meet my friends' 9-year-old kids. And I'm just like, wow, I cannot imagine that kid being me. And going through a life-changing car accident like that. And I think about everything you said about those ages like 7, 8, 9, where you're like old enough to know what's going on, but you're too young to know what's going on at the same time. I haven't fully formed my thoughts around that.
And that's perfectly okay. I feel that you touched upon how you're just a reflective person and you have been reflecting on this. It'll be amazing to connect with you, say 6 months to a year down the road and see if there was any insights or these aha moments that really clicked after this conversation. Because this is what I find is magical about podcasts, or the energy of podcasts and this auditory sensory experience, is that when you bring two people in conversation with one another, we activate things within each other. There's going to be amazing insights that I take from this conversation that I'm going to reflect, and I'm going to think about my own life and how I want to parent, how I want to be there for my daughter, but then also how I want to be a servant and a heart and soul led person in the work that I'm doing, and then vice versa. And there's going to be experiences and there's going to be things that happen that I'm sure for both of us, it's going to be these light bulb moments and we're like, aha. Deeper insight into what maybe we didn't have the information for in this moment. And so I hope that maybe this conversation will bring that for both of us in whatever way it's meant to.
I had someone ask me the other day, and they were like, do you think so much of what you're doing now is the message to the naysayers growing up? And I thought that was an interesting question, because I do feel like there was a period of time where I felt broken beyond repair. And a lot of, I think, who I'm becoming now is more of an ode to the younger self rather than the people who told me I couldn't. And I wonder if it's like the people who told me I couldn't became I told me I couldn't. And I can't remember who those people were because I internalized that became a permanent tattoo on me. And so in some ways it's healthier because I'm like, oh, I'm just doing the things I wish I could have done. But I also wonder if so much of why I felt like my light was dimmed growing up was because of these external messages. But I can't necessarily pinpoint where exactly they came from.
I'm trying to make sense of what I want to say here too. And really, I can only just speak to the postpartum experience, is that we always have these, for lack of a better word, fantasies, or how we envision how we would have preferred things to go. And before the experience that changes our lives happen, we have this picture of what we thought was going to be our life, right? And then external challenges happen, the unexpected happens, and you're really forced to course correct. And there's an internal experience that happens with that and an external experience. And sometimes the vision or the picture is really hard to get out of what we would have preferred to happen, or the picture perfect situation. It's kind of hard just to let that go. And I guess to put it a little bit more clear, like my birth experience, for example, I had this beautiful image and vision in my mind of how I wanted my birth experience to go. And I had walked away from that experience with trauma that I never expected to experience, let alone then something else happened 6 days later that really solidified this deep level of trauma that I wouldn't have even been able to prepare for, even if I had known that it was going to happen. And it took me about 6 months of my postpartum really to sit with what that emotion was trying to teach me. And I went through darkness, but then I also ended up finding light in it and found acceptance. And I feel that's one of the most beautiful and confusing simultaneously parts of the human experience, especially when you go through an experience that is unexpected and you feel that it was unfair. But things happen to the strongest of us who can alchemize it in for the better. And it sounds like that is exactly what you've been able to do with every bit and piece of what you've been able to wield into creation to help serve and impact the lives of the people who also probably don't have the community behind them to support them in the ways that you can.
I think about both of our stories, and I think what that turning point was for us is, and this is maybe why I haven't done as much reflection, is that yes, what we went through was hard and we found meaning from it. Maybe we found a new perspective on life, or that we have the capacity to get through really hard things that we never could have imagined for ourselves. And in a lot of ways, I remember telling someone the other day, I was like, I think my superpower is finding meaning in all the things. Sometimes that can be too far. Sometimes we may never know why a seemingly random event happens the way that it does. But if meaning will help us perhaps find purpose or make sense or heal through those things, then I think that's worth it.
Absolutely. I love how you just said it's your superpower. It's serendipitous because this was just a little conversation that I had with my 8-month-old before putting her down for her nap and then hopping into the recording. We were getting ready for our daily walk, and we were talking with my neighbors who just came back from Japan. And we had saw a hummingbird. A hummingbird was flying around. We constantly see them in our complex because we've got trees and flowers and all of the things that they love to gravitate towards. And I just looked up and was like, oh my goodness, what a cutie, and talking about the hummingbird because I love hummingbirds. And I look down at my daughter and she's looking at me and she gets her little pouty lip out. And I look at her and I'm like, oh, I was like, did you get jealous that I was calling something else cute and not you? And I went up to her and I was like, you are the most cute thing in this world to me, and don't ever forget it. And I just started doing the cutesy little mommy thing to her, and she started like perking up and giving me her smile that is just the light of my life. And then we went about our walk. And I got to thinking about that. And as I brought her inside to feed her lunch, I just looked at her and I was like, baby girl, your sensitivity is your superpower. And your empathy is your superpower. And I am going to do everything in my power to reflect that to you so you never lose sight of it, because I just felt it. I just felt that she's this pure, innocent being. And she saw her mom saying something else was cute and it wasn't her. And I'm like, that was so precious. That is her superpower, her sensitivity, her empathy, and her love, and the love that she feels from her mom. That is something worth cherishing and something worth protecting. And so I love that you said superpower. Clearly, there's a magnetic energy to really sitting with the experiences of life and being like, what I've been able to alchemize from my experiences, that is my superpower. What else would you say are some of your other superpowers?
Ooh, I do pride myself on being a doer. I'm someone who springs into action right away, as you can see from the suite under my umbrella of disability advocacy. I kind of think about the through line of when I couldn't find a disability community, I created one. When we couldn't find events that featured disabled speakers, we created them. When we couldn't find a list that celebrated disability leadership globally, we created it. But I'm also curious about what it would look like to just be. I think that's where I am. I would say maybe I prided myself too much on the doing. That now I'm exploring who is just Tiffany when she's not wearing her advocate hat. I get a lot of joy out of connecting people and finding ways to bring them joy. One way I did that, I'm just thinking, I have a lot of friends who are skincare enthusiasts. And now that I've built a little bit of a platform on social media, I'll have skincare companies sending me way more product than I can use. And I'm so grateful, but I'll put together these care packages for my friends. And most recently, I reached out. I've been looking to get more plugged in locally. So I've been looking for different volunteer opportunities. And I found this sober living home for moms who are in recovery who get to stay with their kids. And I reached out to them and I said, hey, would you be open to receiving some new skincare products and makeup? And they were like, of course. So I rolled this luggage over to them. And then I got a text from the person on the staff I was in touch with. She's like, it all disappeared. They loved it. And I'm like, I really hope the moms can have their own spa day. And so that, yeah, I think just finding, and I'm like grateful to have received those, but I know that there's someone else who would be so much more excited for that opportunity. And how can I find ways to connect those dots, whether it's gifting like that or connecting to people to collaborate. And then I appreciate that I'm able to, I have a very loud voice that I'm still working to unlearn that says, you can't, you can't, you can't. But I'm also really proud that I continue to show up despite that voice being extremely loud. And as we're recording this, I had the opportunity to try surfing for the first time ever. I've never touched a surfboard before. I've never stood on one or attempted to. And even as I was doing it, I was like, how am I going to do this with one hand? I was talking to the instructor. I'm like, can you show me how you push yourself up with one hand? How am I going to paddle? All these questions that I have habituated that I'm trying to unlearn. It's become habit, the incessant questions that come in around how I'm going to do something. But I just tried, and he said, we're going to get into the water. And I was able to stand on the board for 2 of the runs. And then one of them, I was on my knees, and the 4th one, I fell off at the end. But I'm so proud of myself for doing something that that voice is so loud that's telling me that I can't do it. Even with the half marathon, I had that experience in high school. So the warm-up was to run a mile. And that same day, I quit. I quit the same day I tried to join the track team. But I think about those micro moments growing up where I just gave up a little too soon. I even think about Diversability's trajectory. It took us until maybe year 5 or 6 after relaunching for us to really hit our stride. And up until then, I was staying at dreamers and doers' homes. I was using points to buy flights and getting scholarship tickets for conferences. I appreciate my persistence to push through, even when that negative self-talk can be really loud.
One of the questions that I have, and maybe you have just a brief answer to this, or maybe it's a long, extensive one with some really good insight. For those who might be struggling with that themselves, whether it's internal talk or beliefs, limiting or otherwise, or just somebody who is really trying to bootstrap their way into getting to the next level of their business or their mission-led organization, whatever it may be, what advice would you have for them just to keep pushing forward and waiting for the puzzle pieces all to come together in the way that they're meant to?
I have been calling these gentle nudges from the universe. I will share, I literally just stood on a surfboard yesterday, so I don't know how to paddle or ride a wave or anything. But what was interesting about this journey to try to learn to surf as a woman who's in her late 30s, and I've been finding like social media content online around other people who are in their late 30s or 40s or even older learning to surf, is that I realized that a couple people on the USA parasurfing team I'm either connected to or have been in touch with in the past, but I never connected the dots. And they've been so helpful to recommend me to different adaptive surf clinics to try. So I have one coming up this Sunday that I'm going to check out. And she just made an introduction to her like USA parasurfing team lead or something. And that's not a professional thing per se, but it's, this thing that I feel so intimidated by. And I guess this comes back to the message around like having those people who believe in you. I'm finding these gentle nudges of things coming in my direction. I guess the gentle nudge here was that yesterday I actually just showed up to volunteer for a beach cleanup for Earth Day. And it just so happened that at the last minute, they posted on the Facebook page like, hey, our partners who teach surfing are going to be there. So if you want to try, you can. And I was literally the only one who raised my hand after the beach cleanup who wanted to try. And again, that little voice was there being like, oh, you're inconveniencing them. But I was like, they put it out and they offered this. So let me just say yes. And this is happening on a sooner timeline than I thought, but I'm still going to show up and push through. So I translate this over to your question around like work or other limiting beliefs. And this is a hard one because I think there's a stat out there that says a lot of like small businesses will fail or not make it past a certain point in time. And there are some businesses that maybe don't have the model to continue. And there are some that maybe you look for those gentle nudges from the universe. So I think about for me, like receiving our first $10,000 contract. And that happened in 2018. And then in 2020, we had to pause all of our in-person programming and we weren't sure how to move digitally. But then we got an over $50,000 grant from Facebook through the Meta Community Accelerator program. And so I don't know if a $50,000 grant would be considered a gentle nudge. I guess I come back to whether it's a gentle nudge from the universe or having those different points or those small wins that are showing you that, hey, I believe in you, whether it's that $500 grant or the whispers from when I stood up and introduced myself at that Dreamers and Doers event in New York, whether they're nudges or people or a small grant or even a small business win that is showing you that you are going in the right direction. So that's what I'll say about that. I don't know if that'll land with anyone, but around the limiting beliefs, honestly, my negative self-talk is still very loud. And I guess that's why a part of me prides myself on continuing to take action despite. I think about when I got a book deal, I didn't even know if I had anything to say. But now I was contractually obligated. So no matter how loud the limiting beliefs were, a manuscript needed to be submitted by a certain date. And actually, I missed that deadline date by a couple of weeks. But I think about the power of community and how in my case specifically, I guess I do look at these gentle nudges to say, hey, even though your limiting belief is really loud, you do have these people who are rooting for you, or you just received this grant or this business win, keep going. And I do wonder, there's a really great TED Talk about how those of us who have what are known as high ACE scores, adverse childhood experiences, like childhood trauma, it does impact our brain development. And so I think one thing I've had to learn about myself is that I do notice that my self-talk tends to lean negative. And in some ways, I had an aha moment actually talking to a coach from Dreamers and Doers, where it's amplified by a real person in my life that I have a relationship with. And so this real person is kind of like the embodiment of my negative self-talk, and they feed off of each other. And yet I'm still taking action to move forward because I actually told myself, I haven't done it yet, but I was like, I feel like I'm going to collect testimonials from all of the people who have been positively impacted by my work, whether they're a part of Diversability's community or whether they've read my book and it's really positively impacted them in the way they want to show up in the world, or even people who have read the book who are now starting their own initiatives that are centered in anti-ableist principles. Let me collect all of those testimonials and put them into a book so that I can continue to revisit them later on. And so in a lot of ways, I think that my purpose and my impact are louder than those self-talk voices. And I continue to anchor back to that.
I would definitely reflect that back to you. The word that kept coming to mind as I was listening to you speak is that your courage was louder than the self-talk. And these nudges were coming to you because they knew those ideas, that strength. They knew that you were the one courageous enough to make it happen. And I think that's very empowering. And you had mentioned, you were like, I don't know if this is necessarily going to land with anybody. I think it will. I think it will in a way that is very unique to your lens and your personal experience and how you've been able to overcome things. And I think the last little bit of that is there's, again, the external. There's always going to be external challenges that are going to challenge us, whether to keep pushing forward or maybe to take a step back and reassess and see if there's another path that we're meant to pursue. But if you can keep coming back and taking the small steps or large, big leaps as well to go towards the work that you feel destined that you were meant to do, then it doesn't necessarily matter about the timeline. I think a lot of people get stuck when, like you were saying, most businesses fail within X amount of time. That's all noise. That's external noise to make you feel like you're far behind or it's not close enough. And the quicker that you can set that noise aside or turn it off and just be so crystal clear in your courage and your path forward, then you really can achieve anything. I feel that it's really that simple. And I think that there's a common thread that is taking form in my recent conversations on the podcast is that when you're called to do life-changing work for other people, but even for yourself, it can be as simple as you want it to be. But if you're in community with people who believe in your vision and can really help support you, and it sounds like you were brought community and you were brought people to echo the amazing things that you were bringing into creation when you needed them the most. And I think that's very... I've been using magic. Magic a lot is like a word, but it is magical. I don't know how else to explain it.
Yeah, I will share. I've been thinking about this word alignment a lot. And someone asked me, how do you know you have alignment? And then I kept coming back to these gentle nudges from the universe. But I had an opportunity recently to model in a fashion show that was featuring adaptive and inclusive products for the disability community. Now, keep in mind, I had just run this half marathon. And then I had found out that Adidas had launched this adaptive running shoe. It has laces you don't have to tie. And so I got selected to be in this fashion show, which was kind of cool because it's, again, to me, it feels like if the greatest gift is being yourself, I'm just being myself. And all of a sudden it's like, okay, do you want to model in this show? And then I was like, yes. And then I found out I'm going to be modeling for Adidas. And we each got gifted a pair of the Adidas running shoe, which now I'm going to be using to train for this full marathon that I aspirationally want to do. But I just thought it was like so fascinating that it was like, okay, I just did this running thing. Adidas is an iconic brand that I grew up, like my first ever pair of sneakers was Adidas. And perhaps this is me, the superpower of finding the meaning. And now I'm modeling on a runway, wearing the brand that was so iconic as a kid. And now I get to wear the running shoe that they've designed for our community to go pursue my next dream. And I find a little bit of joy in that, but I love how you kind of describe it as the magic. Being the youest you, I think, is going to bring things into your life that maybe you could have never even fathomed or imagined.
Absolutely. It becomes magnetic. And oh my goodness, one of the things, it's like just this example, you could give a masterclass of PR because again, you're following your dreams, following your purpose. And there's these other experiences that are coming into your vortex that aren't directly connected to what you do, but it is. And it's maybe taking it away from the founder identity and leaning into the creator identity, but it's exactly the same because it's still you. And so I just feel that, like I said, it's like a masterclass in PR, is that sometimes when you are just so focused and so clear on the work that you want to do, other opportunities will present themselves to you. And if you can find a way to bring them into the model in some way, then that's how you continue to maybe attract even more opportunities. I don't know. I just think that's fun. And again, that it makes for a perfect story when we're talking about taking our experiences and turning them into stories to share on podcasts or in bylined articles, or maybe this is part 2 of your book. Is like you can talk about how you were able to have all these other amazing opportunities, and it's because you were being you in the full essence and still being very clear into what you can do with those experiences for other people. I feel this conversation, it was always meant to happen, I feel today, even though we have been talking about this for quite some time. I always believe that the timing always aligns when it's meant to. And just some of the golden nuggets of wisdom that were shared here, it makes perfect sense as to why it was meant to come into fruition today. But is there one last part of wisdom that you would want to leave the listeners, but then maybe what else you're calling in, since we do have an open road ahead of us of what is possible?
I will say that this conversation has been unlike any other I've had. We dove into parts that I don't have a neatly tied bow around. And I appreciate that too. I think we need to also show people the messy middle. My word for this year is rooted. I think a lot of it is not only a return to self, like feeling really grounded in who I am, but also rooted in terms of place. You can probably hear it throughout this conversation. I constantly find myself on the go, and while I love that, I also want to find space for stillness. So all of that to say, I think I'm just figuring it all out, like all of you probably listening. I'm calling in exploring more of who Tiffany is just as a human being and not a human doer. And it's so fascinating because I know we spent a lot of this conversation talking about this wonderful community called Dreamers and Doers. And I pride myself on being a doer, but I also just want to spend more time being. And I think for me, I'm calling in more integration of all of that.
Very beautiful. And thank you for affirming that we are in the messy middle, because I feel the messy middle is really the part of life. We have this opportunity to still learn and adapt and grow and change and call in the things that we want, and then also leave behind the things that we don't want. And that is a beautiful gift, because that means we still have room to grow. We still have life to live. And that's the greatest gift of all. So thank you so much for echoing the messy middle, because everybody listening, myself included, other guests, I feel that we are all on a similar journey, and it really shows us how connected we really are. And I think that's really beautiful.